Proszę Państwa, kardynał Dziwisz chwilę temu zadzwonił i prosił mnie bardzo, żeby Państwa pozdrowić. On w ten projekt był zaangażowany, wiele razy z nami był i lubi go, lubi nas, ale z jakiegoś powodu nie mógł przyjechać. Prosił o pozdrowienie Państwa. Proszę Państwa, za chwilę będziemy mieli panel poświęcony wojnie i temu, czy myśmy się do tej wojny przyzwyczaili. Zaprosiliśmy do udziału w tym panelu panią Olgę Budnych, która jest doradczynią prezydenta Zeleńskiego, ale ona musi być dzisiaj w Nowym Jorku, wiedzieliśmy o tym, ale przysłała nam film, o który ją prosiłem, ja już go wcześniej widziałem. I ten 3-minutowy film chciałbym Państwu pokazać. Po obejrzeniu tego filmu zaproszę pana redaktora Macieja Zakrockiego, który ten panel poprowadzi i zrobi do niego wprowadzenie. Czy mogę prosić o film?
Я стану дипломатом.
Коли ми переможемо, я стану видатним хіміком.
Я стану вченим.
Коли ми переможемо, я стану пожежницею.
Коли ми переможемо, я стану лікарем.
Dzień dobry Państwu.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm a journalist, also a television journalist. I've been working as a journalist for about 40 years. I've also made a number of documentary films. Well, I wouldn't like to spoil, perhaps, the impression of the film that has just been shown. But, well, we also know how to have influence on our emotions, how to bring about different emotions, but also at the same time, well, for a number of years, decades, we have lived in the world of moving pictures. Basically, all of us have a small TV screen in our pockets. But, well, somehow we also get used to such pictures, resilient to different feelings. I remember someone who was in New York on 9/11, the terrorist attack on Twin Towers. And someone was actually outside on the balcony of a house and saw exactly the first airplane hitting one of the towers, not believing their eyes. Then the other plane, the person entered the apartment, drew the curtains, switched the television on, and basically watched the same thing, looking at the television screen. And I remember the person said, in a sense, it calmed me down, as if the picture that is seen on the screen, in a way, maybe it's for some less terrible, because we are used to such pictures living in the world of wars. This war we are speaking about is maybe the most terrible for us, because we feel it keenly, because it's very close to us. What I'm saying because it might seem that after more than 2 years, roughly 2.5 years since the beginning of what we call a full-scale war in Ukraine, it might seem that we would grow used to this war, and maybe this natural, at the beginning, enthusiasm to help others. The level of this enthusiasm might go down, it would seem. Our attempts to help those who suffer as the result of the war. We also remember, well, another war in our country. To a certain extent, I must admit, I'm surprised that once surveys have been made in the European countries, the aggregated results for the whole European Union were made later. This is the survey that was published on the 23rd of February this year. 89% of Europeans support humanitarian support. 84% support the idea of inviting to European countries refugees, war refugees. 72% support sanctions against Russia. 72% also support financial support for Ukraine. The authors of the survey also are drawing our attention to the fact that this support has slightly gone down. Well, we can still be, well, perhaps even surprised that in many of the points I have mentioned, the support is quite high, but it's slightly changing. Humanitarian support, difference in 3 points only from the previous survey. As for the financial or military support, there is a change of -9%.
Bardzo różnie to wygląda w poszczególnych państwach.
Differences, of course, in different European states. We should not be perhaps surprised by the fact that most Hungarians are against financial support for Ukraine. But actually, there is a separate category. The question was asked if we were to support financially Ukraine further under the condition that the EU funds for Hungary would be unblocked. 69% of Hungarians said that in such a case, yes. So we can see that the results of the perhaps local propaganda in different countries it is still there, and a somewhat egoistic perhaps way of thinking can manifest it there. Can I still draw your attention that still about 55%, so still a majority of EU citizens, is in agreement with further supplies of arms to Ukraine. But there's also a somewhat changing trend. This number is falling. Some explain this by drawing attention to new elements in this support program. Arms shipped to Ukraine, as you know. Recently, President of Ukraine, Zelensky, and members of his government traveling to different European destinations. Not only they are basically demanding an agreement on NATO, on other countries, so that they make it possible for Ukrainians to use the supplied long-range missiles to attack also targets in the territory of Russia. There is still no consent, no agreement there, so this also perhaps has an impact on the opinion of the general public about military support, because basically every time the first question was whether to supply Ukraine with tanks at all. Many said no, this might lead to an escalation. Tanks were delivered. Then F-16, should they be also delivered? And many said again no, but then yes. And now the next element, should Ukraine be allowed to use the long-range missiles, trying to reach targets within the territory of Russia. Politicians often say that this will lead to another escalation of the conflict. We will be directly part of the conflict. At the same time, the Kremlin would say that this is yet another red line that is being crossed, and this may lead to the Third World War. So as for the military support, it is still there. Ukraine is being supplied with arms, but as I mentioned, about 55% of Europeans support this type of aid. There are countries, of course, where there is a majority against. For instance, 60% of Italians is against for the military support with arms for Ukraine. Slowly concluding my introduction, I would like to say that perhaps the situation is not very bad, but the fact that at the same time we are getting used to such pictures we have just seen, it is a fact. Additionally, as we all know, we have recently been, how shall I put it, well, I would call it, we have been attacked by other pictures from Gaza. We are seeing new pictures, people suffering, more blood being spilled. Then we have to, well, get up in the morning, go to work. Well, I'm not condemning anyone, simply this is the way that our life is. Can I invite our guests, our panelists now? Dr. Oleh Turiy, Vice Rector for Strategic Cooperation at the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv. Doctor, please join us on stage. Professor Tomasz Schwartz, Director General of Renovabis. Professor Gregory Reichberg, Professor at the Peace Research Institute in Oslo. And Professor Vaja Vardidze, former Rector of Sulkhan-Saba Orbeliani University in Tbilisi.
So, who would like to start with a comment to my introduction? Does it really mean that still we have a strong support for Ukraine, for victims, for refugees? We are still ready to deploy the weapons there, so no worries.
Dziękuję bardzo za zaproszenie do tej
konferencji. Much for the invitation. So, I'm ready to discuss this, and I can start because I am from Ukraine. I can present our point of view here. So, there is a question which is general in nature. Has Europe come to terms with this war? And we will be looking for an answer to it here, jointly, at this panel and off the panel. I'm a historian. As a historian, I can say with greater certainty is that the war is now rooted in Europe. It's an everyday reality that we have to live in. Not all of us, or rather, not everybody and everywhere experiences the war in the same way also in Ukraine, but it's a fact. This war is a fact, and it's a fact that is here to stay. I believe we all see it. So there is this longing for a lasting peace. We want to strive towards it, but first we need to think about how to make this war over, how to make sure that it's over. How can we stop this current aggression? So, at this point, let me help for the support, for all the help that we've been receiving from European countries and from the whole world. This help that is helping us to stop Russian aggression. Naturally, the warmest thank you goes to Poland and Poles. Now, it was Putin's regime that started this war. It is not exclusively a Ukrainian war. This war has been going on for many long years now. So what are the main reasons of this war? Let me give you a list. This sin of totalitarian communism that was never made up for. Just to give you an example. Now, what do I mean by that? The free world made a major mistake after communism collapsed. This post-Soviet Russia was considered a successor state, and it was never called on by the democratic states to confess its sin, and those new rulers were never forced to purify, to clean Russia of this old communist heritage and Russian imperialism. There was this Western belief that deepening economic relations would be enough for a lasting peace. However, these hopes have been shattered. The Kremlin used that to accumulate resources for future wars. Yet again, the world saw a regime that wanted to change its borders by force. It's a new totalitarianism that disregards peoples and communities' rights. Putin, its milieu, want to destroy the Ukrainian statehood and identity. They're open about it. They want to simply refuse the right of Ukrainian existence. Putin will not stop at the Polish-Ukrainian border. Already now, Europe needs to consider its own safety. Europe needs to work towards that end. Putin's regime wants to rebuild Soviet or Russian empire, but he's also trying to dominate the world. All the West are his enemies. The West and its democratic system, humanist values are his enemies. So the question was, have we come to terms with this war? Do we accept that it's there? What can we do to finish the war? I believe that our first joint task, the most important task, is to stop the aggression and to condemn the ones that planned the war, that waged the war, and who try to justify this war. I would say that at this point we can be optimistic, especially when it comes to most European politicians. Also, the same is true of European institutions. Look at Ursula von der Leyen. She visited Kyiv yesterday, and yet again she reiterated that Kyiv has European support. She also brought 35, million or billion? It's a loan. This time, it's a loan that is collateralized by the Russian assets. So there is this attempt to activate frozen Russian assets. It's her and Roberta Metsola, the President of the European Parliament. In all speeches on the war in Ukraine, they both say, we will support Ukraine as long as it takes. They keep reiterating that. These are declarations on the part of the political leaders. What about societies, though? Are societies going to be ready to support Ukraine at times at the cost of their own wealth, as long as it takes?
From the German perspective, Renovabis has for more than 30 years always helped Ukraine and the Ukrainian churches to build up a civic society, or to build themselves as part of a civic society. And the civic society, existing civic society, is one of the reasons because the war has begun, because that is exactly what Putin doesn't like. A civic society with strong voices who are also sometimes against the leading politicians. That is what civic society does. So we have always tried to do that. Now, when the full-scale invasion began in 2022, it has already begun in 2014, but when this war in the 24th of February 22 began, many Germans were not only shocked, but also able, willing, and really open to help whatever it costs. Even our politicians say that. We have spoken about the so-called Zeitenwende, change of times. Now, after 2 years, more than 2 years, after 1,000 days of war, we have to consider 1,000 days of murdering, of torturing, of killing innocent people in the Ukraine by a Russian regime, which sends also sometimes innocent soldiers in this region to kill. That is such a decline of civilization, what we have never thought that would be able and coming again in our continent after our terrible experience of the Second War, where Germans have really made so many guilts. So we couldn't imagine that. So we spent a lot, we helped a lot. The solidarity was great. Even in Poland, there was such a solidarity, and still is, which is really, we cannot highly estimate that. In Germany now, after 2 years, I see, as a head of an aid agency, that the people become tired to see every day again these pictures of the war. They are becoming tired, and I understand that, because always see pictures of suffering, pictures of destruction, pictures of dying people and emergencies is not what you and we all like to see. That is understandable. But it is also understandable that even in the Ukraine, the people do not like to see these pictures. They have to suffer these pictures every day in their own context. And that is why we try to, as an aid agency, as a part of the civil society in Germany, to convince the people that solidarity is not a short-time obligation for the people and for Christians, but solidarity is a long-time perspective, and that we have to support with all our open hands as long as it is needed. And but it's a very hard job in the moment, because we have so many others. Maybe now, for example, on the support market of donations in Germany, there are so many initiatives who also, for example, Gaza war, and then now the floodings in Eastern Europe as well. And there are so many others who are interested to keep money from this hand. So we are doing our best, but the people become tired, and we have to act again these tendencies.
But it's also important, if I can ask you and asking to add something, because now there is a situation for us, at least danger in Germany. There are elections in some lands, in 2 lands. The parties who are generally against the idea to support the Ukraine are winning. And so what is the answer of the current government to that? It will be also, let's say, change another Zeitenwende in their politics, not to lose all the assets in all lands in Germany?
Well, the influence of Putin and the disinformation of Russia in Germany is immense. It is immense. And also in Germany, we have, especially in the eastern part, in the new, so-called new Länder, we have never had, like you said, also made a history of the influence of the Sovietic politics and period, of the communist period. They feel themselves as victims of an occupation of the Western landers. So often, a lot of, and then they say, well, if that, the Russians were always our friends. And they really are in this narratives of that the Russians now have to defend themselves and their values. And the influence of the disinformation campaign is really strong in Germany, because there are many also many Germans with not Russian backgrounds, but who came after the fall of the so-called Berlin Wall back to Germany. So we have 10 million people who have this remigration background. So, and they still have a lot of relatives and a lot of relations there. The German government is not infected by that. And even the opposition, the Christian Democrat opposition, is not infected of that tendency. But we will see if in this Eastern German Länder there will be governments who then can infect a little bit the national policy. I doubt that. Therefore, we have to make a clear policy of information against disinformation. And therefore, it's important to have testimonies, witnesses, and also to send our politicians, to send our civic society representatives into Ukraine, and to show that this society, with all their problems, is really part of the European family, and that is the future for our continent as well.
Mm-hmm. Professor Reichberg, you wanted to?
Yeah. Well, I come to this discussion wearing two hats, as it were. One hat is I live in Norway. I've been there for about 25 years. I'm a New Yorker by origin. The other hat is I work in sort of Christian just war theory. So, speaking to the Norwegian hat, I think in Scandinavia there's still really very strong support for Ukraine. There was a TV program a couple of weeks ago with the foreign ministers from the Nordic countries, and you could see that they had coordinated before the debate. There were others as well. It wasn't just the foreign ministers. There were academics coming with different points of view. But you could see that they'd coordinated beforehand to demonstrate the support that they have for Ukraine. And I think that was really important. I learned in that discussion that the Scandinavian countries are among the biggest donors to Ukraine per capita. I think when we talk about support for Ukraine, we have to recognize that the support will be greatest in places that themselves feel under threat from Russia. All right, so that, so Scandinavia, obviously Finland has a 1,400 kilometer border. With,
the longest border.
The longest border. Norway has a border with Russia. Of course, Sweden has a maritime border, etc. So supporting Ukraine is also about supporting oneself. And that's not something hard to sell to the public. The farther one gets away from viewing Russia as a direct threat, the more this war appears under the guise of a sort of humanitarian intervention, coming to the aid of others who are under threat, but where oneself is not directly in that situation. When the war broke out, I was in Calcutta, India, and that's what I wanted to read about. There was a Indian language newspaper at the hotel. I start flipping through. I'm like, where's Ukraine? It's not the first page, not mentioned. I had to get to the 8th page, which was the international news section, to see Ukraine mentioned. So I'm saying this to say that the farther you start moving your way out, the harder it is for people to understand why they should be supporting Ukraine. The US is falling somewhere in the middle. And that's a big challenge. When it comes to the issue that you raised about long-range weapons, I think it's important in this discussion to distinguish matters of right in the sense of legality, international law, from matters of, judgment, matters of what's likely to happen. So from the point of view of right, of justice, it's clear to me that Ukraine has every entitlement to take the war into Russia, if either through troops or through long-range weapons, provided Ukraine uses these long-range weapons against military targets, unlike what Russia's doing, which is, using these weapons against civilian targets, and that's a, clear violation of international law and of morality. Ukraine has every right to do that. But we need to step back, though, and consider whether it is wise to undertake these actions. And I say this because this war is being fought out in 2 fronts. One front is on the battlefield. But the war is also being fought on the level of persuasion, communication, threats. And so the reason that these Norwegian foreign ministers were, unified and saying, we're going to stick with Ukraine as long as it takes, they were sending a message to Putin that there is resolve. But if we're in the domain of sending messages, we need to think about how the messages are likely to be received. Okay? It's not enough to think about how is the message thought of on our side. We need to think about how will, the Russians, and the Russians, you've got different levels. You've got the leadership with Putin at the top, but then you have the Russian people and so forth. So you have to see how will these messages be received. So I foresee a danger with long-range weapons, a risk, not a certitude, but it's a risk that Putin has been selling this war to the Russian people as a war against the West. The West wants to subjugate Russia. So he's trying to claim that this war against Ukraine is not against Ukraine. It's really the West using Ukraine as a kind of Trojan horse. So you're getting this kind of... so if long-range weapons are used that really strike into the Russian heartland, there is a danger that this will lend credence among the Russian people that this is an existential war, all right? And this is and when people start getting into existential war thinking, that's where they begin using means of warfare that should not be used. And of course, we've got ultimately the threat of the risk that a nuclear weapon will be used in this conflict. So what I'm driving at here, it's not so much a matter of where justice lies, it's a matter of what's prudential to do.
Yes, please. It works probably.
Thank you very much for your invitation. I'm glad that we can also speak from our perspective. Well, when we speak about the war that we are witnessing in Ukraine, yes, I think it's quite clear that we agree that this is not only a Ukrainian-Russian war, but this is a war that starts already in the communist times. This is a war between, well, how shall I put it, between civilizations even, a war between different systems of values. So the more we understand, I think, this war in this broader sense, the more it becomes, I think, a less existential threat for us. Because, well, today during our discussion, we are thinking whether we are coming to terms with the war, whether we are getting more and more tired, perhaps, with this war that, well, has been waged for around 1,000 days now. But let us again ask about what it means to come to terms with war. Can we get tired with war? Well, if something concerns us more or less directly, it is difficult, in my view, to come to terms with that. It's a relative, something relative, certainly. You can, of course, be resilient, but still, in a certain psychological way, you might tend to come more or less to terms with war. So this softening, as if I can call it like this, the softening of attitudes, getting tired with those pictures you watch on the screen. In a way, yes, we perhaps grow used to that, and we might perhaps be likely to change somewhat our attitude to war. This is a significant problem, I think, for the society. If the society does not quite understand what is going on there, if they don't understand that it's not about helping those people 1,000 kilometers or so away, but we're actually helping ourselves. I think this, well, this has been mentioned, of course, before, that supporting Ukraine is not only about supporting Ukraine, about showing our solidarity, but at the same time, supporting Ukraine means that we are helping ourselves in a way, that the border is not necessary, perhaps, where it is, on the Dnieper River, for instance, but in this war, the real border is somewhere else. Also, it cuts across our societies. It's as if a conflict of different values, as I said. It's very much about perhaps understanding that people have the right to make choices about their future. In our post-communist societies, especially, some paradigms, ways of thinking, they are still, in my view, distorted very much by this heritage of communist thinking. Very often we do not realize how some events, phenomena are analyzed or are seen. And this analysis is distorted, as I said, by our way of thinking that was shaped in the communist times. Additionally, of course, the media, they very often distort the picture. There are, of course, a number of elements we have to be aware of also in the narratives that are presented in the media. Well, the reality surrounding us is hardly ever clear for everyone with different points of view. So if we ask the question whether we have grown tired of the conflict, well, perhaps we don't quite understand again what we are witnessing in Ukraine, because the softening perhaps is psychological. It's a matter of attitude, and this, well, very much concerns everyone individually, perhaps individual attitude to the war in Ukraine. Very often we do not quite realize, perhaps, to what extent our feelings are influenced by what is happening around us within our societies, or the role of the media. Well, you can ask the question whether we should perhaps become decadent, just be immersed in what we have and not worry too much about the future. Where are we heading? What is going to be the world that our children will inherit? We speak about Christianity here, but sometimes I think these are just words. We don't have a clear vision of what we are going to do in practice, drawing on our Christian origins. Again, I stress it, the war in Ukraine is not merely a conflict between Ukraine and Russia, but it's a war that concerns all of us directly. I will add an additional question, perhaps. Well, the paradox of the current situation is such that the Ukrainian army, with the support, of course, of different military systems by the Western world, well, how shall I put it? It's actually doing very well, in spite of all. It's managing very well. And now in many Western societies, when people hear once Putin occupies the whole of Ukraine, he will move on west. He will enter the territories of other countries, but those countries, also the Scandinavian countries, are part of NATO. Very often I can hear such opinions that if Russia was not able to easily win in Ukraine, how come it's going to attack NATO? That's absurd. It's impossible. It's not an argument. Many say, no, he will never attack NATO, the most powerful military alliance in the world, with the United States, of course, as part of the alliance. Well, there are many dimensions to a war. Maybe Russia will not militarily attack NATO, but Russia already today is attacking our societies in Germany, in Poland, in Georgia. The war is there. Let us not deceive ourselves. Well, even if Russia is not militarily moving west, attacking Berlin or Warsaw, it does not mean it's not attacking us in other ways. We can have many different examples that the Russians are attacking us in different ways. Corruption, deceit, eliminating enemies. So certainly the military conflict is perhaps the last resort, but the war of values is certainly there. These are the categories I think we should be also applying. Some people say values. What are values? Something general. When we speak about values, we can only understand that properly if we refer it to some concrete realities that we are part of. So if we use very general notions referring to different social geopolitical processes, well, yes, we are getting tired. We are sick of different speculations, description of the condition of the contemporary world, contemporary politics. But once the media show pictures of children dying, a friend of mine from my place, I remember dramatic pictures. We are not at a conference where we speak about some theoretical constructs or scientific dimension of the conflict. No, we speak about live, concrete events where we lose people on an everyday basis. In Ukraine, again, my friend, a student from our university, we keep forgetting about that. Also, I think our Christianity, sometimes we are too, I think, general, losing sight of what matters the most.
I believe I have one more question to our guests. We don't have much time, and whatever time we have left needs to also be dedicated to questions from the room. Now, when it comes to the level of support for humanitarian help, for helping refugees, support for Ukrainian or military assistance, that level of public support is still quite high. At the same time, Ukrainian EU accession negotiations have already started. So you have the same politicians who say we will support Ukraine as long as it takes, will often say, right, but its membership, is it not? It's not going to be easy. After all, we need to consider not so much our own interests, but we need to consider our European Union, how it can function were Ukraine to join this club. Here in Poland, there have been a number of major protests, farmers and truckers protests. They said, well, if you allow Ukrainian farmers and Ukrainian products here, it's a huge threat. Ukraine has these very good fertile lands. They can simply flood the EU with their food. So now people say, right, when it comes to negotiations, this chapter on food is going to be very difficult to negotiate indeed. Then it's another paradox, is it not? So we're talking about the beginning of the accession negotiations. So this perspective of joining the EU may be what? It may be 10 years away? A long-term perspective, is it not? But is this not going to be a factor that is going to lower the support for Ukraine? Because people will think, oh, come on, but it's a threat for our interests. What about cohesion policy? Many countries say, all right, when they join, we're not going to get anything because all the support is going to go to Ukraine because they have the poorest regions in the EU. So how that is going to impact social mood?
I remember the discussions when Poland wanted to become a member of the European Union. That were exactly the same questions in Western Europe. So let them come in and they will show that they are not flooding us with good food, but with intelligent people and with their creativity, and will be such a success story as Poland is for Europe now. And I'm so proud that Poland is part of our European family, and it's now one of the leading nations in also economic perspective, and that can also be for the Ukraine in 10 or 15 years. Let them come in, and they will find their place in the European family. I have no doubt about that being member of a common house will help everybody to find also his place in this common house. That is my first thing. Then we have spoken 1 hour before about migration problems. What is the alternative to not bring the Ukraine to us, to the European Union? We will have millions and millions of migrants, refugees, and with all the problems with refugees we have. Why we do not are so creative to, instead of make fears living about our possibilities, to have hope and future, to give also all the Ukrainians the deep confidence that they can build their future also in a Ukraine part of European Union, like it is in Poland now. So many Polish people who came to Germany now come back because it's very good to live in your country, and it's not necessarily necessary to live in Germany to get wealth and to have wealth. That is now the part of the European history that comes to a very good and a very fine equivalence.
Czy można parę słów?
May say a few words. The mic seems to be working. I'm neither a politician nor an economist. I will try to respond to the question the following way. Yes, you can keep theorizing, You can say, what if this, then whatever. In these discussions, in these our thinking about the future, what is relevant is the following. Here in Poland, nobody doubts that Ukrainians are Europeans. Ukrainians are Europeans. If so, the question is, how can we make sure that Ukrainians feel European so that they can participate in this great venture that they belong to? And only then do we solve the problems that stem from the new shape of that community once this new shape has been formed. So you said, but what is going to happen when Ukraine joins the club and they have these fertile lands? They've got those black soils. 33% of this area has been mined. So our question is, what do we do to make this land work, to be fertile? So many people have left Ukraine. What do we do to have enough people that would work there? So many people have been wounded. They have lost their limbs, hands and legs. What do we do? These are our problems that are plaguing us. We need to fix them. And for that, we need not so much the help, but cooperation, sensitivity. You need to realize that we have a problem. We have problems, but these are not just our problems. They are our common problems. They need to be common problems so that we can find ways to act, so that we can find ways to tackle them, to manage them. So that's me, very briefly. By all means, yes, go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
We like to think that when a conflict ends, all the conflict is over entirely. But it doesn't work that way. When conflicts end, new fault lines emerge. Think about the Second World War. The Allies, their relationship, how well did it fare after the war? Well, we know what came. So it's extremely important now that we try to think ahead of the curve. Because like you said, it's going to be probably a 10-year period. So there needs to be careful study, and the populations need to be prepared. So there needs to be a vision articulated around how to handle these matters, so that when it ends, we don't get to a point where all of a sudden all of these other problems just sort of pop out of the box, like Pandora's box. So again, we need to carefully think them through now. So it's very good that you're asking the question.
Absolutnie. Cała piękno Unii Europejskiej
polega. The whole beauty of the European Union is that the EU is an open community, a community that is open to the beauty of creation. I'll put it differently. Professor Schwartz said it very well. There were similar concerns and anxieties when Poland was about to join decades ago. So you have to realize the following. Whenever a new country enters the EU, whenever a new country joins, it's not at somebody else's expense. It needs to rely on the principle of fairness. You have those Russian assets that will go to Ukraine. These are investments. And it's going to translate into our future joint benefit. Now let's talk about the principle of competition. Competition. It's not about defeating somebody else. It's not supposed to be a destructive competition, but constructive. And by means of entering into this relationship, we all become stronger. And another thing, no social group, no ethnic group is ever supposed to feel threatened or hurt or harmed. This sense of fairness is the very foundation of good understanding one another. And Professor actually mentioned that people need to be prepared for it all. You need to show them things. We need to grow up in a way. We need to mature so that we have this fair and just system. And there is this one important thing, closing the borders. It's not about keeping the expansion until the EU reaches Asia. No, it's not that. The idea of openness needs to be there. The European Union needs to move globally because it relies on personalism, on human dignity. There are these values that we are trying to be spread. It's a Christian mission. And this Christian is born in freedom and for the sake of freedom. Paul wrote in one of his epistles, Jesus set us free for freedom. So we don't do things at somebody else's cost. No, we are moving forward for our own common benefit. I would like to be as optimistic as you are. However, I'm afraid it's not going to be all that easy. At least today, some governments say, yes, we will okay the expansion, but only provided that treaties are amended. Other countries say we'll never agree to any treaty amendments, so you can see fault lines rising there. And there is this event, let me put it this way, a recent event, because the Volhynia crime was being remembered, and we heard Ukraine is not going to join the European Union as long as they have not solved that issue in accordance with Polish expectations, that is. So we've heard something like that recently. But that's it from me, and now we shall have a Q&A. So the discussion now is going to expand. The mic is over there. Andrzej Strzyński. It is my understanding that the subject has been exhausted. We have no doubts about the future, about the next steps. But I have an important question that is somewhat aside, away from this dialogue. What about the Christian churches? What have they done to stop this war? Have they done anything? Because I think that this is something that has not been done. Now you can hear the Moscow Patriarchate Orthodox Church that has been supporting the war, but they are just a part of Christianity, are they not? What about the rest of Christianity? What the rest of Christianity has done to stop this war? Thank you very much. It's a very important question. I'm a historian. I'm a historian of the church, and yes, I study this older history, but I've been also following what is happening. And you couldn't be more right. The Russian Orthodox Church does play an important role. So the church has been turned into an instrument by the state. It's a true tragedy that this church itself turned itself into a tool for propaganda. They volunteered, and that is terrifying. Because when you see it, you tend to disbelieve in church in general. The question is, what is the mission of a church? To justify war? To call for somebody else's destruction because they are different? Is the mission of a church to demonize somebody else because they follow different rules or rely on different principles? Now, the situation in Ukraine is as follows. We have different churches. No single church dominates, unlike it is the case in Russia. The Orthodox Church in Russia plays a similar role to the role that was played by the Communist Party in the Soviet Union. You know, they spread certain messages and so on and so forth.
So if we want to be opposed to this view, we have to stress the need for Christians to live together, to fight for the dignity of every human being. All Ukrainian churches made their position very clear on this during the first revolution, the second revolution in Ukraine, also today. That's very important. I stress that. All Ukrainian churches speak about the need to defend Ukraine. They work together to help in the face of the Russian aggression. They clearly condemn Russian aggression. And they're also looking for international support. I think at the international level, it would be very important to do what Orthodox theologians did, not the Russian ones, but representing other countries. They presented their position about this ideological concept of the Russian world as a heresy. They made it clear it's a heresy. So I think it's time maybe for the Catholic Church to pose the same question, because we speak about dialogue, need for an ecumenical dialogue, but what do we speak about and with whom do we speak on this? This is my reply to the question posed.
That is true, and the Holy See, and I'm also connected to the Holy See, is never ending with his argumentation that there is no holy war, but only the peace is holy. The Holy Father has spoken about that from the early beginning of this war, that only peace can be called holy and saint. And because we have this vision, we know that one day we have also, when the people is ready, especially in Ukraine, to reconcile, but that is only possible when the war is over, and when also the aggressor acknowledges he's guilty, and that he wounded a lot of people. So we have this way of reconciliation is always a both-side movement and not a one-side movement. And therefore, we need also the readiness of the aggressor part.
Tam pani prosiła o tu, o właśnie, tu proszę.
From this side of the room, yes, please.
Lina Kozińska, parafia.
Lina Kozińska, Stanisław Kostka parish at the grave of Jerzy Popiełuszko. We're celebrating the 40th anniversary of the death of Jerzy Popiełuszko. We would like to invite you. I speak on behalf of Żoliborz, part of Warsaw, our Committee for Social Dialogue. We are organizing a conference in January. I invite you to us, to Warsaw, Żoliborz, where you could think about the way in which to end the war in Ukraine, maybe how to make an end to all wars and conflicts in the world. This is what matters. Hopefully, well, we're going to stop the wars. There are at least 60 wars in different places around the world. Those who are experts know better, and those who are specialists, I think, in the subject of making people live in peace. We should, from the early age, prepare our children to live in peace, not to live in war, not to participate in war. So again, my invitation to our sanctuary in Żoliborz, Warsaw, Popiełuszko grave. Thank you very much for this invitation. Another voice in the discussion? Yes, here and over there. Yes, please. We'll see how we are doing time-wise. I just wanted to remind everyone that Archbishop Gondecki has written a letter to the Patriarch, and he got a response. I read this letter at our university. The Patriarch said that the Poles should not be trying to make anyone rebel against Russia. I remember also a long time ago in Tsarist Russia, the Russian Orthodox Church priests actually were supposed to pass on information from the confessions if anyone was against the Tsar. So it's not much has changed.
Tak, to komentarz był.
A comment, not really a question. Yes, another speaker here. We still have a few minutes, perhaps.
Well, I would like just to bring the issue of the problems of the institutional problems of the EU concerning enlargement, because there's a long queue of member candidates, starting with Montenegro. 12 years, Montenegro. I know the ambassador of Montenegro to the EU, and he was the one negotiating the chapters. It takes, even if you have, let's say, the economic stability, institutional stability in a society ready, it takes a lot of years, the negotiations. Just to tell you that in terms of negotiations, it takes time. And at the same time, there are countries that are complaining. They say, well, we are here in the road, 12 years, 10 years, Albania, Montenegro, Moldavia, all these Western Balkan countries. They say, okay, we are a small, maybe Serbia is a little bit more tricky, but the rest, let's say, are countries that don't have big issues just to try to reach a certain level of EU parameters, first thing. The second thing is the question as well for the EU, because I've read, probably many of you, the figure of 800 billion euros reconstruction needs for Ukraine. The EU does not have that money. There are many countries at the EU which are bankrupt. France is joined the parameters, Belgium for sure, Spain is getting 120% of GDP when the limit is much lower. So the needs are increasing. We're increasing for the welfare to maintain, we're increasing the taxation, we're increasing the age of retirement. And the question is, how are we going to face that? And the third very brief point, I've heard also the position of the Holy See. The position, as far as I understand correctly, the position of the Secretary of State and the Holy See in general in this regard is we have to de-escalate and stop the war. It is true that it's a matter of justice, clear, but it's a matter also of prudence, as it was said, because this is for the moment a regional conflict, very bloody, very rejectable, but for the moment it's a regional. And the risk is that there is a highest value, which is the peace beyond the regional conflict. So I understand that this is very tricky in a situation where you're the victim of an attack, but at the same time, in terms of the understanding of the peace, holy peace, sometimes you have to deal more with the prudence than the right that you have to exercise. Thank you.
Anyone wants to comment?
I think that the Holy See had a difficult time getting his arms around this conflict, how to communicate its position. It's true that Pope Francis was very clear there is no holy war, and I think that was important to affirm, particularly because Russia tries to paint this as a kind of holy war. The term has even been used recently, which is out of keeping with the Orthodox tradition. It's an innovation, which is a dangerous one. So I think Pope Francis has wanted to take care not to religify the conflict. So on the other hand, I think Pope Francis he doesn't not like to speak about just war. So from the beginning, he wanted to be a voice of peace, but he had difficulty really coming out clearly and saying, yes, Ukraine has good reason to use force to defend itself. It took him a while to get to that point, and I understand he doesn't think that's his role to encourage use of force. But still, that created a doubt in people's minds about his position. So and then others in the episcopacy, the Monsignor Gallagher and Cardinal Paroli kind of took up the slack and talked a bit more in terms of that Ukraine not only has a right to defend itself, but should defend itself. There's a moral obligation, and the others should aid in that. At the same time, we don't want to see this expand and become something much worse. So this is very hard to find the thread one's way through this. But again, I just want to emphasize it's in no one's interest to see this conflict continue to the bitter end. Most wars don't end with the full victory of one over the other. Most wars end in some kind of compromise. I remember I was in a meeting with former Foreign Minister of Iran, Zarif, and he said, it was a discussion about the Iran nuclear agreement, and he said, yeah, we're really unhappy with this agreement. This was before President Trump withdrew. He said, we're really unhappy with the agreement. He said, I hear that the Americans are unhappy with it. He said, that's a sign that it was a good agreement. So at the end of the day, there are going to have to be hard compromises. I'm not about to propose what they could be, but it will have to be both two-sided.
But sorry, when you are saying about the hard compromises or possibility of hard compromise, do you believe that the war could be ended with Putin as a leader or head of the country?
I think it.
Because then you have to negotiate with him.
I think it would be misguided to expect that to happen. To expect that Putin no longer to be in power. It's very hard to know what Putin's intentions are. And part of the challenge is his intentions have changed in the course of this war. I mean, it's my impression that at the beginning, this was a kind of, Putin was engaging in a coercion strategy. He wanted to make Ukraine so afraid that it would meet his demands. And I think he was surprised when Ukraine didn't. All right, but the danger of making threats, the danger of embarking on a coercion strategy is you might have to, if your threat fails, you lose credibility if you don't follow through. And that's what Putin ended up doing. His credibility was on the line, so then he ended up attacking. Now, Russia has suffered a lot in this too. I'm not speaking in the moral sense of the term. They've sanctions, 500,000 dead and wounded. So I think it's going to be very hard for Putin to continue this for any long duration. He tries to give up a front that he can. So my answer, I don't know if you're saying morally speaking, could there be an agreement with Putin? Is that your point? I think that most agreements have to be made with people who are morally dubious. That's the only way to bring an end to them. If you set as a condition that that person's no longer there, well...
To bardzo jestem ciekaw, co pan powie, no bo pamiętajmy, że...
Very interesting what you are saying, because let us also remember The Hague and the perspective of Putin in The Hague. Yes, so the question is not only actually about what is going to happen and what depends on Putin, what will happen, but as a historian, I have been observing the whole decade, well, more than a decade actually, the whole period of recent history. And when I heard about those different slogans of Putin's regime, Russian authorities, they were looking for enemies, demonizing Ukrainians as Russians who went astray. Well, I, as a historian who knows what such slogans led to before the Second World War, very similar slogans, similar models demonizing your enemy. So I think now going back to the situation before it happened in Russia, it's impossible. It's not only Putin who is taking decisions, not Putin who kills people. It was not Putin who killed my student and her family 2 weeks ago in Lviv. One of the missiles hit their home. But these are concrete people, people who have this picture of the enemy in their heads. So this is what matters. This war is not only a war against someone, but this also is a war that Putin has to, if I can put it like this, Putin has to wage this war to keep the Russian society together. He doesn't have any other arguments for the Russian society. not economic or cultural, no other arguments to keep the society together. So I think maybe in a cynical, brutal way perhaps, but in the situation facing us, I can hardly imagine discussions and compromises with the regime, with the ideology as it is now, with the demons that have been let loose. Even Putin, I think, will not be able to stop those demons in the long run. So for me, only a military loss of Russia, only then can we talk to them, or wait as the Germans did, or the Koreans had to wait. We have to understand that, well, there is something that is in progress, and we have to perhaps wait. There is a conflict here very clearly between freedom and tyranny.
Our experiences from Bosnia and Herzegovina, where we have helped a lot in this civil war. This is something different but analog. Is that one of the first administrators of the EU said to me, peace begin then, or peace treatments begin then, when somebody is convinced that he loses more when he continues to the war than when he begin to start a treaty about peace. So still now, I guess that I'm not speaking now as a representative of Renovabis, as a citizen of Europe I speak. I think still now Putin is thinking that he wins, and he can win this war on the long side. And as long as one side is thinking that at the end they will win, the peace treaties will not start. When they see that the costs are higher to continue than to stop, then we can be sure that there will be found a compromise, as you talked about that.
Ja też chcę tylko kilka słów powiedzieć.
Just a very short follow-up, because holy peace has been mentioned. It doesn't strike me as something really nice. You know, the objective itself, let me rephrase that. When you have peace, peace must not be our objective. It must be the effect of our actions, of what we strive. When you discuss peace, it may be a tool for manipulation, because you use beautiful words, beautiful notions, but then through back door you introduce falsehoods and nasty, rotten compromises, and long-term such compromises may result in more victims and deaths. This is very important. No reasonable person wants war, and war needs to be over as soon as possible. But it is also important to understand the following. We must not go for a false compromise in the name of peace, because long-term suffering will be greater. The thing is, it is something we have experienced in Georgia, something like that. I will rephrase it yet again. There is no peace without a sense of justice, no peace without understanding. There is no peace without a striving towards a common goal. Russians also need to understand that. They need to understand that it is in their interest to make peace with us and to have an understanding with us. So first, you need a proper diagnosis. You need to diagnose the situation. Oleh actually talked about that. So there is this concept of Orthodox Church peace, these are just empty words. Putin is waging war only to legitimize his power, this criminal junta that he's been running for years. And it is, this system of his is just an extension of the communist system, mass terror, murdering millions of people, and this current war is but an extension, but a continuation of the war that started tens of years ago, maybe 150 years ago. You need to be aware of that. Thank you. I believe that's a very good point to stop this discussion. Applause for panelists, and thank you very much.